Hey guys, it's me, Leo from Bookworm Reading, and today we have another book from History Month. This book is George Washington, the First President, by Sarah Albee, pictures by Chin Ko. Now, before we get started in the video, be sure to check if you have liked and subscribed. Alright, enough said, and let's get straight into the video. George Washington, the First President, by Sarah Albee. Pictures by Chin Ko. In 1776, colonists in America declared independence from Britain. The two sides fought a war called the American Revolution. George Washington was the general who led the American army. He was brave, honest, and fair. The war lasted 8 years. The Americans finally won. American America was a new country, but who will lead it? Everyone knew the answer. George Washington, of course. Should he be a king? Should he be a president? But George shocked everyone. He did not want to be a king. He did not want to be a president. I retire, he said. In England, King George was shocked. In France, King Louis was shocked. Everyone was shocked. No one gave up power by choice, but George Washington did. Who was this man who said no thanks? George was born in Virginia in 1732. When George was 11, his father died. George was close to his half-brother, Lawrence. When George was 19, Lawrence died. George inherited a big farm. It was called Mount Vernon. America was still part of Britain. The French and British both wanted more land in North America. Young George was sent west to claim more lands for Great Britain. With no roads, George traveled by horse, by raft, and on foot. But when he finally arrived, French soldiers were already there. They refused to leave. George returned to Virginia. He wrote about his trip. The French king was not happy. He wanted that land for France. The French and British went to war. Some native people sided with France, so British colonists called it the French and Indian War. Young George was made a major. He and his men fought bravely on the side of Great Britain. After many years, Great Britain won, but the war had been expensive. When he was 26, George met Martha Custis. She was barely 5 feet tall. He was nearly 6'3". Martha was a rich widow. George was brave and handsome. She had two small children. He loved children. They got married. The British wanted the colonists to help pay for the French and Indian War. The British raised taxes. They passed unfair laws. At least Americans thought so. Finally, the colonists had enough. That's why the revolution began. That's when Washington took command. British soldiers were trained. They wore fine red coats. American soldiers were untrained. They wore shabby uniforms. With some helps from the French, the American won many battles. The British surrendered. General George Washington was the most famous man in America. George helped create a plan for a new government. It was called the Constitution. People begged George not to retire. At last, he agreed to be president. George had to figure out how to lead a new country. I walk on untrodden road, he said. Martha became the first lady. George chose smart people to help him. Together they formed a government. The new Congress made wise laws, new coins were minted, a new country was created. Everyone begged George to run for president a second time. He served for 4 more years, but he said no to a third time. The people should choose a new leader. George knew what was best for the country. A few years later, after he retired, George died at home in Virginia. Thomas Jefferson called him a wise, a good, and a great man. That is the end of our story. This is the timeline of George Washington. You can pause if you want. And this is some photos about the American Revolution and the spice. And this is what George Washington looked like. Alright, I hope you enjoyed George Washington, the first ever president. And if you have, be sure to drop a like, and I'll see you next time.